So please take the hot seat. And let me just say that David had to celebrate his father's jubilee, and my husband has to take care of our 3 children. Otherwise, they are in their spirit with us as well. And Trevor had to catch a flight to be at his son's birthday. So these are all very, very important things for discipleship, right? To make a difference in people's lives. So I was when we were hearing your teaching, and that was all excellent. And by the way, you can ask questions me too afterwards. I hope. What Krill, Phil. Only easy ones, right? But actually, I wanted to hear in a few words, how were you discipled? And can you pinpoint to some practices that made a difference in your life? Things that if these did not take place, you probably wouldn't be in faith.
Ooh, I was going to say that I don't think that I was discipled, but actually that's not true. I think that one of the most significant things in my early Christian walk was having a deep sense of need to be, I would have used the word mentored probably, but I mean by that discipled, by somebody more mature in the faith than me. So I became a Christian when I was 17. And ever since then, I have always sought out at least one other person to submit my life to, in that sense. And I mean submit in the sense, of willing to not just be advised, but also be obedient. I think obedience, is it's a tricky thing for us to talk about in the Western world when we want to value autonomy, and control over our own lives. But it's always been part of the discipling kind of ethos. Although we might have associated it more with monastic kinds of order. But from being that young to today, one of the first, well, actually, I didn't do it quick enough when we moved to Wilmore. About a year elapsed before I suddenly realized, wait, I'm so caught up in that, I haven't found someone to meet with in that way. But about a year and a half ago, we did that there. So there's a retired professor, actually, of spiritual formation who meets with me, and we talk about things. But I would say, I say that not hesitantly in the sense that I hesitate about that relationship, but because I think that whilst that's important to me, by far the most significant way that I've been discipled over recent years has been in band meetings. And now I said yesterday that I'm in like 6 band meetings. I get discipled a lot, because I see it as being mutual. And students, for instance, will come and knock on my door and say, will you disciple me? I've never been discipled. First of all, my heart's like, I don't know that I can, but then where I usually wait for a couple of others, and then put them in a band, and I know in my soul that they're coming to me because there are things that I can share, of my life experience in their life. But truthfully, I know that I'm gonna just feed off their youthful vigor, because it's one of the great things about working in higher education is just being around young people who have all that life and kind of new insight and everything. It's great. I love it. So it's always very mutual. So I'd say those 2 things. I've always had someone that I've submitted to in that way, and always since about maybe the last 25 years anyway, been in some kind of band, and often more than one. So yeah, does that answer the question? I've never had a bishop.
It's never too late. No. Yeah. I became a Christian when I was 16. There were at least 2 persons who were very important especially in those early years. One of them was a youth pastor who invested a lot of time in me. And the other one was a pastor. I was part of a very small church. The other one was a pastor who invested a lot of time in me. And really both showed me, but also taught me what it means to be a Christian, what it means to pray, what it means to be in community, who really taught the faith to me, taught me how to read the Bible, how to study the Bible, and really how to teach the Bible to others, teach the faith to others. So I became a leader when I was very young, and very, very inexperienced. I remember I was the youth pastor. He was probably just a youth worker because he hadn't started his studies yet, and so he left the town and he went to seminary, and there was a small group of young people, and he put me to lead that group, and I had no idea what to do, but I knew that we should do Bible study, and we should come together and we should pray. I knew how to pray, so I wrote him. We wrote letters at that time. I don't know if you remember. So I wrote him a letter, and it took some time before I got a response back. And he sent me a little book, and it was actually a book on Methodist theology. So that was the first really I taught out of really his recipe. He kind of developed the study material for that book. So I started teaching Wesleyan theology in that small group. Later on, when I was a young pastor, there was a colleague who really introduced me to small groups. He invested a lot also in me, and later on. A couple of years later, we both moved to Copenhagen to serve in two different churches. I think he went there a year before me. And I think for the first 5 years, I was serving in that church. We would meet every Thursday morning at 6 o'clock to pray, and to talk about how we developed our small group ministry in our churches. And later on, we added a couple of people to the group. So he really modeled that to me, how you both disciple others, but also how you bring others into a fellowship of accountability. Right now, I have a very good colleague. Whenever we have a chance to meet, we usually take a long walk, or we sit down together, spend several hours, talk, share life with each other, and pray with each other. And we have given each other permission to speak into each other's life. And then I'm part of a small group of people where, we do what we do in small groups, and we grow together.
I just take freedom to share a little bit about my coming to faith. And I was actually hearing the Word of God proclaimed through radio, Christian television, or a big meeting for the first time in 1988. First time I discovered Christmas, first time I discovered our blue, black, and white flag. So things had really changed in Estonia. I was 10 years old. But very quickly I realized, well, I can say the prayer for salvation, but the question is always, then what? I did not know a single living, breathing Christian. And I went and tried out those buildings. Walked into a church, Lutheran church. Nobody even noticed a 10-year-old kid hanging around. Nobody took it seriously. And then I happened to be in a church without knowing it was a church. It was an old communist building, and it was just a bunch of young people who hugged each other, which is unheard of in Estonian culture. Later, we had been there a few times. They invited us to a church, and I found out I'm in a revival meeting. But the question, what next? And the question was answered when they invited us to attend small groups to learn about Christianity, 10 lessons of Christianity. And I think that the key moment for why I'm here today is because the small group leader made a phone call. I was very afraid to go. I wasn't sure if I can go. But that man calling a little teenage girl, that's a strange thing, reminding me, would you come? You have waited. We want you to come to the small group to study. I think that was critical. I would not be here without that. Another critical moment was when 10 lessons were over, the teacher turned to me and said, well, lessons are over. You take the book. You're going to teach the next class. And they had two other key people. They had a small group overseer who was handling several of those, organizing them, times, rooms, people, and so forth. And she was smart enough to put next to me, I was at that time about 13, a 14-year-old. So the two of us were teaching people in their 50s, but in Christ we were the same age. They had just come. I had been through my 10 lessons. I had read a little bit more of the Bible. And I was like, wow, what amazing trust it was, but also helped me develop the gifts. And after that was over, you did it a couple of times, they did another important thing, and that was they handed me an address and said, you are going to be part of this home fellowship group in your area. Would you go and check it out? And I went to that building. My goodness, it was a 100-year-old building. I remember still that creepy feeling of walking into that yard and opening that creaking door and having to go upstairs and then meeting a old lady near her death, I think. She was so old. And I remember how she invited me into her absolutely like an inner chamber of a really old house. Your heart is beating fast, but she was so loving. She was so good. And she poured me a peppermint tea out of her cracked teapot, pretty much in there. And a few other ladies showed up. One of them was blind, but she could walk. And there was another one who couldn't walk very well, but she wasn't blind, and they were coming together. And then there was a lady who actually later was a church planter herself, but she was a lady who was a lady of scholarship. We were studying Book of Acts, and she was, every time there was a complicated word like Areopagis, she went and took a dictionary and put her glasses on and read us what that meant. Well, I wasn't quite sure if I fit in. It wasn't exactly the most seeker-sensitive environment. However, by the end of that first day, I felt that these ladies are going to be so disappointing if I don't come back. They just might die. And so I just felt I need to go back there. And they were discipling me. And one day there was a teenage guy showed up. Oh, that got more interesting. But I kept going there. And when another lady of kind of in between our ages showed up, then we realized this small room is quite full. And they had something smart. They said, well, why don't you guys go and start the home fellowship group? She was afraid because she was afraid to lead. I didn't have a home. She had a nice home. So those things matched together. We did it together. And she became that spiritual mother who saw me through many, many different things. She saw me the day when my parents divorced. I was in her room praying. That just changed your life, right? I mean, every life crisis, it was prayed through. And So that was, I think those are the critical moments of discipleship. Question for all of you. How many of you are here because of small group? I mean, because in faith, because of small group. Show of hands. High up, high up. And then anybody who would say you have grown in faith because of small group. Okay. Anybody here who wishes they had a small group? Yeah. So, I think it's a common theme. I was going to ask, how do you start those things? Or you say you're part of 6 different bands. How does that work with your daily schedule? And how does that work in your life?
Specifically, how do I manage 6 bands? Is that what you mean?
So, I mean, it's superhuman.
Well, didn't you know? Oh, no, I'm kidding. I think it helps. First of all, I think the only way that it can make any kind of sense is to say that meeting in band, for me, is supremely life-giving. You know, there are some things that you do that just suck the life out of you. And there are other things that just give life to you. I could just be doing one thing that sucks life out of me, and I'd be spent with it, let alone do 2. So at that level, I can have 6 bands because they all give me life. Now that's at a different level than sort of saying, so you don't live in a parallel universe with different rules of space and time than I do, and that's true. So I have a diary, and I have a full-time job as well as all of that ministry, and do many other things as well as that, as we all do. Our lives are I think modern life is multiply overwhelmed, generally, and. But actually, I think I'd be able to cope with my multiple overwhelmings less if I didn't meet as frequently in band as I do. I think just life would. So actually, adding band is something that actually helps me with the rest of the stuff. It doesn't make it more complicated. But there are diarizing, if that's a word, calendar issues when it comes to meeting bands. So the first thing to say is that they don't all meet every week. I have one that meets monthly, and that actually meets online. So one of the things that we practice in our movement is we have missioners in different places and around the world, and all of our missioners, as well as planting bands and starting bands where they are all in a band with other missioners online, virtually. So we meet through Zoom or Skype or something like that. So I have one of those that meets once a month. I meet with someone in Ukraine, in England, and in America, but it will vary depending on who's in the group. So, that is only going to happen monthly, even when it's online. So this is one way to redeem virtual life. But even if it was face to face. I have two bands that meet every week, and 3 that meet every other week. So that's 6 altogether. The 2 that meet every week, I meet with them at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I meet with them before work, which by Mr. Wesley standards would make me lazy. Right? He'd be like, 4 o'clock. That's the time to get up and get going, right? Now, I'm not somebody that can burn the candle at both ends, and my bands are always like trying to help me find patterns of rest, So there has to be something that gives at the other end of the day. I try to get to bed early if I can, although that can be difficult at times. But so it's one of the things I was trying to say, the other day is that and bands just alongside other things like our house fellowships and house church planting and other that I do. So finding rhythms that are healthy. Now, I can sustain that. I wouldn't say everybody has to have 6 bands, or one band is great, would be enough. But some people have more energy, capacity, I guess, to do things than others, and we just, that's just we have different giftings. So I think this is one of the things that's a particular calling on my life. That way, this way.
Let me modify that question a little bit for Bishop, because I imagine he's not dealing with 6 bands, but I know that you are dealing with. You're dealing with so many Zoom meetings and so many other meetings that I don't know, if I were you, maybe I'd be tired of all meetings. But is there a place for small groups, or was there a role of small groups when you were working on church planting or in your ministry? Like, what role do they play?
I've always been in a small group. Well, not always, but ever since I was a very young pastor. So I have been in a small group for I don't know, 34 years maybe, in different small groups, of course. Some of them I have led or been part of leadership, and some I've only been part of. It has been the churches I've been in have always had, or we have developed small group ministries. But it's as we've heard through these days, it's not just about small groups. I mean, it's not the number; it's what goes on in the small groups that's important, and that's also going to determine how much discipleship comes out of it. So it has always played an important role, different levels, both on as really as a tool to introduce people to the Christian faith. So we've done small groups like discovery groups, alpha courses, of course, who has an element of small groups, and then groups for to grow people on different levels of discipleship. Also groups to discover your spiritual gifts. But right now it's just a priority. I can do once a month, and it's never on the same weekday because that just don't work with my calendar. But that once a month is really a high priority. And in that small group, I'm just Christian, and we just talk, we just share fellowship, we share our lives, we pray for each other, and we grow together.
I have a question, but you can judge if you have a better question, please. But I was wondering how to start a small group. Like, how would you start it? How would you put it in action? Because in the small churches, what I see, at least in my context, is sometimes people are very overworked, and there's already a time slot. A Tuesday night there must be a Bible study, and Wednesday night there has to be some other type of group. And you are not allowed to change any of those times because you're changing some massive tradition if you're going to change that. But you're talking about groups 6 a.m., you're talking about groups that are once in a month, you're talking about things that are flexible. But I think that we are kind of more rigid, or we have been thinking about, well, something has to be always weekly and at a certain day, at a certain time. And it doesn't matter whether it fits. Because and here's another thing, my family, you have 3 boys, a husband and a wife. We are already a small group of 5. So if you take us to someone's home, they have to be very tolerant people to take that many people. However, even some of our relatives put us in a hotel. Do you realize that? I mean, it's a cost of having children sometimes. But there is also this. Your schedule is different, your needs are very different, and yeah, how would you start a small group?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to define what you mean by small group, because there are different kinds of small group. So, you know, I would differentiate, as I have done, between something that's like a house fellowship, where, you know, you might have 12 to 20 people or something like that, depending on the size of your house, and a band, which would just be 3 or 4. So, I mean, the answer would be different depending on what you're talking about there. In brief, well, I don't know if I can be brief. How do you start? Is that the question, or is it how do you deal with what you were just talking about?
How would you start them? How would you activate the small group? If everybody says, gotta be Tuesday night at 7.
Okay, I see. Okay, well, let's have a go at that then. So I'm now thinking about churches that we've worked with that are asking those sorts of questions, and immediately comes to mind, and I'll talk about this particular group that meets in Lurgan in Northern Ireland. Now that Trevor's gone, I can say what I like about that Northern Irish. No, I'm actually ordained in the Irish Methodist Church, so I love the Irish. So this, we were working with a pastor there who caught this vision, and actually caught the vision for the way that we do house fellowship, which, for start off, is a little bit different than I think most house fellowships do, because I'd have to tell you what that looks like, but let's not get into that right now. Wanted to develop house fellowship and band meeting. Now, they had already a pattern of meeting weekly with Bible study, right? So what they were doing was Bible study, and they were always searching for the next curriculum and this sort of thing. And he was facilitating one of these Bible studies, and in his Bible study, they made the decision that they were going to actually transform that community, not add something else, but to transform that fellowship into more of a house fellowship approach than just a kind of Bible study that meets in a house. They were going to form a house fellowship, and they were going to make that then meet every other week, so that the weeks in between, they in the same space, it would give room for people to meet in bands, okay? In alternating weeks. So nobody could say, because they were already coming to a weekly group, right? But they essentially, in that instance, transformed the group into a different kind of fellowship, which was also then integral with making space for a band. Now, that's a little bit different than saying, then how do you start those bands, or how do you start a house fellowship? But it addresses the question of kind of finding rhythms that work and establishing a sustainable rhythm. It's a matter of being kind of creative. But for some people, literally have to just stop doing things in order to do other things. And we would actually recommend that, because actually, if you've got a genuine house fellowship, it's like an ecclesial community. It's going to, if you're just doing Bible study, it's just Bible study. But if you're actually forming extended family with people, it's not just Bible study. You're ministering to them, in lots of different ways. You're sharing life together in lots of deep ways, and you have to be committed. And it takes a lot more. You're not just dispersed. You're itching.
I have to interrupt you, because did you just say that you can change things and drop things out of church activities calendar?
Well, it depends on your context. So this was. So in that case, in Lurgan, it didn't really require an awful lot of doing that, because they were already meeting at a certain time and place. They changed what they were doing. That was one thing. Now, that may be almost impossible, but the group itself met and talked and envisioned, and they decided to do that as a group. So it wasn't imposed on them, and nobody was reluctant. I think one person might actually have left and gone to one of the other Bible studies, and so they could keep doing that same thing. But they changed, so they just changed, and then they met every other week. So it wasn't, apart from changing the format and doing a new thing, in terms of time and rhythm, it was not making any more demands on their schedule than was already there before. But if I can just add one other thing, my own view, when I was younger, I honestly used to think I could change the church. obviously, As I've got older, and this might just be my cynicism, not only do I think it's not possible, I don't even want to. It's too much energy. I don't have I honestly don't have enough life left in me for that. But that doesn't mean to say that I don't in ministry, and we don't get alongside people in ministry who are looking to change the culture of a church. The question is, how do you do that, right? What I'm increasingly absolutely convinced you can't do is change it programmatically. You can't change it by committee. You can't, look at the calendar and just start doing things differently like that. And this may just be the particular charism that we have with our movement. What I would recommend is you start movements. You start a movement within the life of the church for people that want to opt into that. So I would say, how do you start this process? Whether it's bands or house fellowships, I'd say to a leader who wants to do that, commit yourself to that and just start one. People who want to be involved in that can be involved in that. And then let it grow. Let those who are in the church who want to be involved in that, don't roll it out, and kind of make people do that. Let them get involved in that. And then as that grows, let it multiply and let it become like leaven within the life of an existing. Let people who don't want to change not change. Let them stay the way they are and die the way they are. That's fine. Let them just do that. And frankly, some people in ministry might be called to do palliative care, just to keep people going until they die, so they can die well. Personally, that's not my ministry. That's not what I'm called to do. So I try to encourage that. And by the way, that principle of creating movement within is something that works in churches of all sizes. Immediately, again, what comes to my mind is not just a sort of smaller church in Lurgan, but we work with, when I'm back in the States, we work with a mega church in Missouri. The senior pastor woke up one morning, I'm kind of telling the story slightly differently, woke up one morning and looked at himself in the mirror and said, what kind of a monster have I created, Did I mention this before? But what he did was started a movement, again, within that mega church. So I think that the same principle is true even with church planting, for instance. So whether you building things by creating movement, whether that's a fresh situation, planting, or within the life, or a renewal sort of situation within the life of a church, or within a denomination potentially, you renew it like that from the inside. So.
What thoughts were created by this conversation? And I was also still around this idea of change. Are you allowed to change things in United Methodist Church so we would have more small groups or more fellowship-based? I understand Phil is saying that they should come. They can't come programmatically. They can't be top-down. They are somehow growing out of people's agreeing with one another to do something different.
Movements are generally voluntary in the sense that people have hunger and they want, and then they want to join in. They're hungry and then they participate. And
are we allowed to do that, or how would you go about encouraging that?
Yeah. Some people say that the only ones who like change is a baby who needs a change of diaper. But
I like that kind of change.
It depends on what the starting point is. I think whether there is something going on to build on in the church, or if there isn't. But in any case, I would start by teaching about, so what is the church? And I share that in my workshop, and I've done that frequently. That the church is really, it is three relationships. You could see the church as a triangle. It's a relationship with God, it's a relationship with each other, and it's a relationship with people outside of the church, with the world around us. And these three relationships together really form the life and the life processes of of the church, and to keep that really that center of the church alive. Teaching, preaching, worship, and in particular, small discipleship groups are, I believe, essential. And that needs to be, I think that needs to be taught. It's at the very core of who we are as a church that says that our mission is to make disciples of Jesus Christ through which the world will be changed. And so, again, depending on what the starting point would be, I would start with a few motivated people and to train them. And I would start making a small group with them. And I would lead that group with someone else. And the purpose of that group is really to develop them as leaders and to install a DNA in them of what a small group should be. And then after a year, I would send them out 2 by 2. One as a facilitator, the other to be the one who kind of keep the community together, a hospitality person who has that gift. And then I would say to my church, we're going to do an experiment. I'm going to invite you to an experiment. For the next 3 months, you will have the opportunity for a small group experience. They will meet, I don't know, maybe every second week. And they will meet in the neighborhood where you live. And after that 3 months, you can decide if you want to continue or you want to end. And I would do this in light of the fact that people don't, today, in this part of the world, people don't commit to something that has no end. They commit to something that is like a project. That is until they discover what this is worth and what this is going to mean for them. Because the idea behind this, of course, is that they will not stop, that they would want to continue because they discover how much this affects and shapes their lives as Christians. But that would be my approach if I should start a small group ministry from scratch. Then I would probably soon begin to introduce to the group that you can invite others to join, so that it would be open and you can invite people who are not part of the church. You can invite your friends to join. I see small groups ministry really as an important opportunity for outreach through relational evangelism. And I'm saying this because I have seen this work. Yeah.
Can I make a? Yeah, absolutely. I think that in our experience of planting house fellowships that grow and multiply organically, one of the things that I think we've learned is this question about it's about what it means to be committed to a group like that, and what the sort of boundaries are of a group like that. When small groups tend to be kind of rolled out programmatically, it tends to be, this group is meeting in so and so's house. If anybody wants to show up, then you come because it's on or maybe you prefer a Wednesday because this one's meeting on that day of the week, whichever suits you best. And they're just like open groups for people to kind of drop in. Then, of course, there are closed groups where people are in those groups and then they never want anybody to come in. They turn inward and all the rest of it and draw a hard. One's got an open. It's a kind of open circle. It's just totally open. The other has got a hard boundary around it, and people like it that way. And definitely don't want to become missional at all. I think that what we've discovered is a middle way than that. We encourage people to plant house fellowships that they're not open, but nor are they closed. So they're not open in the sense that, okay, we're meeting on this night, just show up if you want, right? Or when it's convenient, come every other time or something. We encourage people in our house fellowships to befriend others, to share to tell them the blessing that they've got in their heart from being in this house fellowship, and kind of create hunger in people. It's like, gosh, in early Methodism this happened also. People just wanted to be in on these societies and bands, and they say, oh, but you can't until you've got a ticket. You know that, right? So, it's kind of, so you get this kind of like holy hunger, and people want to, we call it the principle of holy jealousy. I'm not in this group. I want to be in this group. Oh, do you? Well, we can work on that. Okay, that's fine. People, also there's FOMO, right? You come across FOMO, the fear of missing out. It's a social media thing. So people people might not opt into something because they're too busy, but they also don't want to feel like they're missing out on something either, right? So we'll cultivate that. So we encourage people to befriend people and to share that vision and to speak out of their own experience of white blessing, and then gradually to invite them in. But already, as part of that befriending and part of that invitation, there's a culture of belonging that is intentional and highly committed. I'm really not interested in multiplying groups as such. What I'd rather have half a dozen radical extended families, who are utterly, it's the Anabaptist in me, I confess, who are utterly committed to one another, and multiply those and have 100, shallow, small groups kind of things.
The only comment that came to mind is how church begins. You gotta be there at 10 o'clock, and then there is opening song, and if you're coming in a little bit later, you feel kind of bad, and then it ends rigidly, and then it goes sometimes. And small groups are different, because at least those groups that I have been part of, people kind of roll in, and it takes about an hour for them to get there, and they're late, and you're okay, and you have several things happening at the same time. As you study, as you pray, as you eat, you do many things at parallel. And the end can be rolling too, which can drive nuts the housing, like the person that houses it, because they want to go to bed, but somebody has a 3-hour story to share, or a prayer need or something like that. But they are different kind. They are focused not on the program, but they are focused on the need of the moment. And when a new person comes, the program sometimes changes too, your conversation and so forth. I promised, guys, do you have questions? First one, hand up, and something that's on your mind.
Yeah, I feel when you just talked about those people who maybe don't want to commit in a way, and they just hop from, or they just attend time to time. Do you throw them out? Or what do you do with those kind of people?
I think it's a good thing for a group to agree on commitment, and to do that really from the very beginning. It is, as in many things in life, you lay the foundation from the beginning. If you have been meeting for half a year and you discover that half of the group, they only come, if they don't have anything better to do, then it's much harder to begin to talk about commitment at that time. So it needs to be done. It needs to be done from the very beginning, and it's easy to do at the very beginning because there's excitement, and people are eager and interested, and they want to be part of this. So that commitment can be laid there. But then I agree that that you need to make sure that you develop a community that people don't want to miss out on. That is something everybody contributes to, but the leadership in the group sets the tone. And the commitment of the leaders, the attitude of the leaders sets the tone for the group. It is as in any other community. It is as it is in the local church. The leaders, pastor, local church, sets the tone. It's really not rocket science. It functions as in any other community, has been my experience at least.
I think I would just say the same thing, that you start as you mean to go on. I would say the same thing too about the missional piece. Start reaching out to non-Christian people, but I would do it in the same way. Befriend, gradually draw people so that they know that this is a kind of. But I think that again, our experience would be that you do that from the beginning, but then also it depends how people are brought into the group. So because in our groups they're not just these like open groups, so just drop in and out. That creates the problem. If people come into the group by relationship, proper relationship implies commitment, even just a befriending relationship. Then what we find in our communities is that people are brought in, they're loved, and they're to use an American expression, they're loved on, from the beginning when they come to the group. But they're still, I guess anthropologists would say there's a kind of liminal state. They're neither outsiders nor are they properly insiders in that sense. They don't fully belong. And one of the surprising things to me has been, I think that people get that. It's a bit like, just think about family, the metaphor of family. Okay, so we're trying to create family. I have a nuclear family, a biological family. I can bring people into my family, but they don't immediately. They know that they're welcomed, and most of them know they can hang out, and they might even get refrigerator rights. But they don't think that they're actually part of my family unless I say, we want to adopt you, or I want to be adopted by you, and then it becomes, more formal or something like that. So I think that it kind of works a bit organically like that. And it's been surprising to me that when people come and there's this sort of the state that they're in, so often they've even sort of said, how do I commit to this group? It actually has, because they've experienced the nature of commitment from everybody else in the group, they know that that's what would be expected of them, and so then that becomes a process, yeah.
I'd like to fit a few more questions in because time is going. Any questions?
Shall I continue?
Yes.
You talked about the house fellowships that you do weekly. How long do they last for?
Do you mean any one meeting, or do you mean over in one meeting? How long would you like it to last for? So we have this slogan that we use: wisdom, not law. So we suggest patterns of practices and encourage people to develop in those. So the basic pattern that we recommend is that a group meets for 3 hours. And it will happen like this. So it begin with a meal. So people in the States, they tend to be they do everything about an hour earlier. They have lunch at 12. Or I'd be usually at 1, or evening. So we would in the States, for instance, we would start at 6. I'm thinking of my house fellowship now, my own. We start at 6, and we eat, and it probably takes us about an hour and a half to eat together. It takes that long because as we're eating, we're sharing stories. We have table conversation. So our basic spiritual practice over the table, we ask one another, so where have we seen the Lord at work in our lives in this last week? You know, actually, we have a whole lot of different starter questions. If you know those plastic things you can put in the middle of a table, like a menu for menus? We have a bunch that sits in the middle of the table. Like, so pick a question, you know, how's God answered prayer, whatever it may be. And so we invite that. People will share a story, and then every time somebody shares, somebody else around the table will pray. It will just spontaneously. And that will go on, and you know, we'll still be eating at the same time. It's not like we eat then talk. We eat, and as we're eating, we'll do that as we're eating and talking, and you know, we get used to eating cold food. It's fine, and then we'll finish, and then we would change scene a little bit. The house we live in is small, and it's one room really. We have a kitchen here, then a tiny little dining area. We squeezed about 20 people in there. We can't all get around the table. We're in like layers. You know, the table's kind of in the middle with the food on it, but we just sort of like sit around that thing. And then there's a couch here, and then a living area that's probably about that big, because we've had to move the couch into that area to get that table in there, right? So then when we're done, we fold the table down and move the couch over there, and then just move into this like living area and kind of sit round in a slightly different way. And then we would just take what the Lord's been saying around the table, and we would sing and pray, and perhaps use our spiritual gifts with one another in a very sort of spirit-led way. So, you know, there's nothing particularly structured about it. And then we would do that maybe for half an hour or so, or maybe 45 minutes. Depends. You know, these are rough times. It's very fluid. And then the last part of the evening, we would, in our pattern, over the course of a month, we would develop we would rotate one of 4 practices, okay, spiritual practices. Everything is bring and share. So we would do bring and share soul sharing, what we call soul sharing. So somebody asked that question, how is your soul? You know, how is your spiritual life? And then everybody shares, everybody prays, and we share our soul with one another. So it's a little bit like a band meeting, but slightly bigger context, actually more like an early Methodist class meeting, right? So that would be one practice. Another would be scripture sharing. So we don't do Bible study in the usual sort of way. We expect, and we've done this in different ways, but we expect people to be reading their scripture and to bring a piece of scripture that the Lord has spoken to them through. So everyone brings a scripture, shares what the Lord has said. Everyone brings, everyone shares, and it's amazing how the Spirit joins everything up. Another practice would be mission specifically. We all bring our experience of seeking to build witnessing relationships with those around us, you know, build friendships and in natural ways, nothing forced. And so we will share, we'll all share, and we'll pray for one another. And pray for the Spirit to guide us in those things. And then the 4th practice would be on disciplines and gifts, sometimes one, sometimes the other, where we will all share our experience we'll pick a spiritual gift. Let's say fasting. You know, have we been doing that? What's been our experience of that? It could be a different prayer practice, solitude. I remember one evening recently, we decided we were going to press into solitude. We got together, talked a little bit about solitude, and then we all just left the house and went away to be by ourselves for a bit. And then came back, and then said, how was that for you? I really hated it. It was fantastic, whatever. You know, we learned a little bit about that. Or spiritual gifts, we've done things where we seek to like recognize spiritual gifts in one another, and encourage those. So those would be 4 basic practices through a month, and then we repeat. And that would be for the last, 45 minutes to an hour, depending on. So we would be there for at least 3 hours, and it feels like a heartbeat.
Yeah, it actually really does work, those things that you described. And I was intrigued by your fellowship bands and leadership bands and evangelistic bands and all this. But in our home group, we did similar things, and we always prayed, we always worshipped, we always shared our testimonies of how the week has been going. But it was almost like, everybody shares, like somebody has a word, somebody has a prayer, somebody has some sort of insight. But it was almost like if somebody shows up and said, I proclaimed the gospel to somebody, I talked to a new person, you could see everybody was like this. It's like, it's as if like we gather, somebody collected some berries and somebody collected some stuff, and that's like, this is a person who hunted and got a deer. That type of feeling. But hearing those stories, knowing that it really works, the Christian life really works, is something really significant.
We'll be very intentional about small things. The secret of small things and small adjustments. It's the mustard seed principle. So if somebody came along every week and had a deer on their shoulder, which is not impossible in Kentucky, trust me, we would probably say, tell us about some small thing. Have you seen, Jesus in your, when you were brushing your teeth or something, tell us about a small thing. So actually that's as much of a discipline, so we kind of, would help that.
Yeah. You mentioned the questions that you ask at band meetings, and Wesley had a list of those, and I think you toned them down a little bit, tiny bit, because I remember that upstate New York, when we started the home fellowship group with my husband, we took those questions, how is it with your soul, and have you sinned lately, and what to pray for, and we toned them down. We toned them down a little bit, and still I remember the looks of the faces and the people of the church when we had this meeting, and it's like, we're going to ask you those questions. It's as if I had asked something illegal, asked them to rob a bank next door or something like that. It's like, really? You're going to ask us these questions? Maybe starting small is a very good idea here, as opposed to going full force Wesley here.
Maybe can I just say something about that? So, if you're in a Wesley, the typical Wesley questions, have you sinned? Now, seriously, have you sinned? Now, come on, have you told us all your sins? Was that the worst sin? It's kind of a little bit like that. But of course, again, that was contextual. So just as Trevor was saying this morning, there are models of band that are trying to kind of redo that. But of course, they tend to be abstracted. People understood, I think, in early Methodism, the wider soil in which something like that was planted. There was a bigger vision of growth in grace and so on, in which that might have made some more sense than it might do. I think you are breaking the law if you ask that of people. No, not really, but a kind of cultural law that says don't you dare invade on my private space. Privatization, you're actually breaking a cultural law there, and it would be the same, in Britain and America or anywhere. But one of the things, you're right. We do have one question on our little bookmark that says, do I have sin to confess? But it's just one thing, because what we've discovered is that if you have a positive vision of the life of discipleship, and you are genuinely hungry, and you are genuinely pressing into that, you don't have to bludgeon confession of sin out of people. If you are really that hungry, and you really are, and you really want that, then you come, and it becomes natural to share how you're struggling, of what your sense of weaknesses are, etc. Because your intention, your desire, your hunger is not to have that in your life, and you want to be healed, and confess your sins to one another so that you may be healed. We kind of forget that last bit there, but
and a little word in there.
Oh yeah.
We quickly adjusted to Wesley, and one of the things that we discovered is to go about the exploration. So, for example, this fruit of spirit in your life. When you gotta have joy, you gotta have faith, you gotta have, and we started asking questions like, so, if you're not do you experience joy? If you are not experiencing joy, why do you think that is, that you don't experience more joy in your faith? And that helped us to kind of talk about those things in a much different way, to notice what's lacking and also help to build it.
Right. No, I think there was a question.
Any questions?
I had a very very practical. How do you cook for such a people every week? Do people like, is it potluck type of thing, or take turns, or just really practically because it's like economically, just yeah.
So let me just use these 3 words: bring and share. That's the basic principle for house fellowship. Now, so that's food, that's story, that's scripture, that's spiritual gifts. Everything is bring and share. You know, these meetings really don't need lots of advanced preparation. Leaders don't have to spend hours before them figuring out, what am I going to deliver at this meeting? You know, I don't mean demons, I mean material, you know, curriculum or something. Bring and share. The whole body participates, and that includes the food. Yeah.
Can I just say something? We're about to close. Am I right? Just in closing, first of all, I'd like to say thank you to both to Phil and to Trevor, who's not here, to you, Cully, and Doug, and everybody else who's been teaching and organizing. You've really done an outstanding job. It's been very inspiring, wonderful learning opportunity, I think. But we can go back now to our different settings. You can go back to the seminary or to Cliff College or wherever you'll be going afterwards, and then you can say to someone in a week's time that I had a wonderful experience in Tallinn and it was so inspiring. I would encourage you before you leave, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, to talk to someone. You're probably not here on your own, you're with someone, and to talk to someone and to talk about, so what does this mean? What are the implications of this? What are we going to do about this? Because that conversation and that decision, what are we going to do about it? Or at least saying, now, this day, next week, we will meet and we'll talk about, so what did we learn and what are we going to do? That conversation and that decision is going to determine what you get out of these 2 days. Not only what you've heard, but what you do with it. So I strongly encourage you not to leave without having made an agreement, an appointment with someone. How are you going to follow up on this? Because we want to see fruit. And this is one of the ways, friends. So I'm going to leave tomorrow morning early. So I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you again for making the commitment and the investment of being here.
Also, thank you. I'm glad somebody else did the evangelist part than me. I usually have to do that. But I just want to make an invitation to you. If you wanted to be in touch with me, you know, our team, then please do drop me an email. Sorry? Oh yes, I'll put on here so there's some postcards, and I've got some bookmarks actually which I'll leave on there that you can take away that have some contact details on. There may not be enough for everybody, I don't know. But this is what we do. You know, 6 bands is never enough. So, you know, please be in touch. It's just an open invitation if you wanted to follow up with me at all. I'm very happy to do that.
Okay, Mark, what does the schedule say? Is this about the dinner time? Okay, but I think we can conclude it here and give you a little time. And then we have a party with all of you students, and we will have this evening an open microphone. We'd like to hear what's happening in your school. We'll have a little game together, and we'll have some cake. So please come back here at 7 if you are a student. We will celebrate being part of MTSE, being together. And for everybody else, please have supper and be on your way, thinking about the things that Bishop Alsted was calling us to do. Because at the end of the day, it's when the rubber meets the road. The action has to take place, otherwise nothing changes. Thank you very much to coming for Tallinn, and God bless you on your journey.